mantle clocks, imported coffee, daily mail service. Does any of this sound medieval to you? Didn't think so. Then what was it doing in the seemingly rural, idyllic land we know as the Shire, populated by an allegedly simple, fun-loving people called the Hobbits? But who were the Hobbits, really? A jovial, food and pipeweed-loving people? Or were they the most technologically advanced Machiavellian political manipulators Middle-earth had ever seen? If you find yourself awake at night, tormented by these questions as we are, please join us in the Speculation Zone. The words of the professor, while beautiful, can be troubling. He drew from a pocket in his old jacket, which he still wore over his mail, crumpled and much folded, Thorin's letter that had been put under the clock on his mantelpiece in May. Tolkien, J.R.R., The Hobbit, 75th Anniversary, Kindle edition. What was a clock doing in Tolkien's allegedly medieval setting, full of swords and sorcery? What about an umbrella, matches, fish, and chips? No medieval palate could handle such modern decadence. Now, the line that we've been fed over and over again is that these are mere anachronisms, not to be confused with arachnicisms, which is what Frodo experienced with Shelob in the pass of Cirith Ungol when led there by the traitorous Smeagol. They will continue by saying that Tolkien was merely using his experiences from his life and infusing them into his work, and that we shouldn't read too much into what is obviously a fictional story for children. But this is a man who invented 2 languages for said silly children's story. So no, I don't buy into your claim that this was an unserious man writing unserious fiction for unserious children. It, the Shire, is in fact more or less a Warwickshire village of about the period of the Diamond Jubilee. Letter 178 to Allen and Unwin, December 12, 1955, handwritten paper edition. Meaning that the Shire was a solid 500 years ahead in its economic, technological, and cultural development compared to the rest of Middle-earth. So why didn't Aragorn, a ranger of the North, have matches to light a simple fire? Well, actually, we know the answer to that. He was a filthy Dunedain. But what about Legolas? Refined, wealthy, prince of the woodland realm. He's obviously rich enough to have the finest anything. Was Hobbiton the capital of a secret, advanced steampunk society hidden away in the hills of northwest Middle-earth? First piece of evidence, the mantelpiece clock, the most important hiding spot of the Shire's most famous burglar, Bilbo Baggins. Now, the image I'm about to show you may shock many of you, so if you have any medical conditions or high blood pressure, I beg you to please avert your eyes. This is an image inked by the professor himself. And what is this in the corner? Look at it! Look! A barometer, but also a mantelpiece clock. The barometer really shouldn't be there either, but look at it! What is it doing there? Now, some of you might be saying that technically during the tail end of the medieval era, they had mechanical clocks. And yes, we're aware of the Salisbury Cathedral clock, but notice, it wouldn't fit on Bilbo's mantelpiece, being the size of a man room and weighing many men's in weight. To say nothing of the fact that Tolkien's rendering looks more akin to a pendulum clock, which were invented by Dutch clocketeer Christiaan Huygens in 1656, nowhere near the Salisbury's birth in 1386, nearly 300 years earlier. Yes, clocks existed at this time, but not that clock. And the barometer? 1643. Well, at least that kind. Don't at me about Galileo. But please do at us by liking, subscribing, or following. In Chapter 1 of The Hobbit, among the refreshments demanded by the dwarves of Bilbo, as they stormed into his Shire home, were ale, cakes, and coffee. Now, coffee is not a plant that is native to the cooler northern European climates of the Shire. Remember, the Shire is Birmingham. It just is. See our video here for why. Coffee originates in tropical Ethiopia, but thrives in climates around the world and flourishes in areas with average annual temperatures between 49 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, altitudes of 3,000 to 6,000 feet, and a minimum of 60 inches of annual rainfall. In other words, places that are nothing like the Shire. So how did they get their coffee beans? Were they doing their own roasting? What do you think they made their cappuccinos with? Or tea? Well, that's from China, everyone knows that. Embarrassing. If they were getting coffee from the south, the only way they could have acquired it would be through the trade networks of Mordor. How were the Hobbits, a supposedly neutral, if not benevolent society, part of a trade network eschewed by the good kingdoms of Gondor, Rohan, and the Elves? What possibly could the evil powers of Middle-earth want from the diminutive alcoholics in exchange for the great gifts of technology, coffee, and tea? Absolutely nothing. Their chief ally, however, saw the Hobbits as the economic opportunity of a lifetime. I am, of course, referring to Saruman and the Hobbit's pipeweed. Now, what could Saruman want with pipeweed? He was constantly harping on Gandalf for his love of the halfling's leaf. Yet he had the largest supply of Longbottom leaf outside of the Shire. So why was Saruman, an ethereal spirit from the timeless halls of LOTR, so desperate to get his hands on that sweet hobbit sticky icky? Because he was addicted to envy. J.R.R. Tolkien spoke of how Saruman was deeply jealous of his lesser counterpart, Gandalf the Grey, and his super cool pipe. So green was he that he took up the habit in imitation of Gandalf. And, as we all know, only cool people have pipes. And as we see from the Unfinished Tales, Part 3, Chapter 4, Subsection 3, it is here that Saruman first learned of the halfling's leaf. Quote, "The council met in Rivendell, and Gandalf sat apart, silent, but smoking while Saruman spoke against him. I wonder a little that you should play with your toys of fire and smoke while others are in earnest speech." Gandalf laughed and replied, "You would not wonder if you used this herb yourself. But it is not one of my toys. It is an art of the little people away in the west." He drew on his pipe and sent out a great ring of smoke with many smaller rings that followed it. With that, he got up and left Saruman without another word. Gandalf was a master at nagging, and it worked. Saruman immediately picked up the habit. It appears that Saruman might have been in the early stages of what some experts call doing a talented Mr. Ripley. Was Saruman coordinating a global trade network, all in a desperate need to fulfill his newly formed pipeweed habit? Almost certainly. And he was using pirates, and maybe covered wagons to do it. Hi, I'm Harrison. I used to be a certified sommelier who loved The Lord of the Rings and all things nerdy. But then one day, I fell into the speculation zone. So Mordor is basically the EU. This one, not that one. It's a large central state focused on a previously and potentially futurely regionally hostile country, looking at you, Germany, that is now the economic and political center for a large alliance of culturally distinct but militaristically and economically intertwined nation-states. See our video here on how the larger lands of Mordor are used to feed the orc armies of the Great Eye. The Mordor Alliance is more than just the desolate wasteland. It also includes Nirn to the south, Harad over there, wherever the fuck Easterlings come from, somewhere to the east, one would assume, and Variags all the way over here. Nothing to say of their alliance with the Corsairs of Umbar over here in the water, because they were pirates, and that's where pirates come from. See our video here on the Corsairs of Umbar. So going by our map overlay over Middle-earth, if the Shire is Birmingham, it just is, accept this, then anything below this latitude should be capable of producing coffee. And anything, well, generally over here, probably had tea. Our conclusion? Saruman had been trading with the Shire. Pipeweed for coffee, tea, and advanced technology with which the hobbits are intimately familiar thanks to Gandalf. So why would the chief economic ally of the chief military ally to the world's dark superpower send an elite two-pronged attack to take out their chief trade partner and that trade partner's chief military ally? Allow us to tell you the true story of the supposed fellowship that you never knew. The text of The Lord of the Rings had three primary authors from which Tolkien translated. See our video here on Westron, the original language it was written in. The first author, Bilbo, was a member of the moneyed gentry class who was responsible for regime change in the East. The second was Frodo, his nephew cousin, who was the primary adjutant responsible for assassinating the head of state of the Mordor Alliance, equipped with the most powerful weapons and armor of the age, including advanced stealth technology, impenetrable armor, and the greatest weapon Middle-earth had ever known. Also, Sam Gamgee's cast iron collection. These highly trained operatives in this joint operation were joined by members of the rival faction to assemble an elite strike squad, covertly known as the Fellowship. This 9-person team included military captains, snipers, and several princes, along with 2 additional vicious Hobbit operatives. This elite strike group set out to destroy the Eastern Alliance of Mordor and her allies, but no one could see their full plan coming. The Lake Town regime change was clearly a dry run for the tactics the Hobbits would employ half a century later in this new War of the Ring. And sitting on the planning committee for Operation Fellowship, none other than Bilbo Baggins. The mission was not only to destroy Mordor, but also the Hobbits' closest trading ally in one of the most vicious betrayals Middle-earth has ever seen. The Hobbits were going to destroy Isengard simultaneously as well. And if you want to destroy that subscribe button, we would much appreciate it. On the morning of March 2nd, 3rd Age 3019, 2 hobbits were dispatched to enact one of the most devastating attacks of terrorism Middle-earth had ever witnessed. At midnight, they blew up the dam above Isengard, flooding the city and crippling its infrastructure. Meanwhile, to the east, 2 more hobbits, disguised as enlisted men, smuggled the weapon to end all wars into the heartland of Mordor, hoping to detonate their payload and trigger a catastrophic seismic event that would cripple Mordor for centuries to come. And, as we all know, they were unfortunately successful, losing little more than a single finger in the inferno that was unleashed. On the morning of March 23rd, the agents were airlifted from Ground Zero, practically unscathed. Meanwhile, the entire plateau of Gorgoroth was engulfed in ash, lava, and fire. I wish I could provide first-hand accounts, but sadly, no records exist. Why? Because all the residents of Mordor were destroyed in fire and ash. Not a single survivor. Not one orc, one Nazgul, one shadowy henchman, or strange, sentient bird statue thing. All obliterated in a single instant, in what historians have since termed Frodo's Massacre, the Hobbiton Holocaust, and Easter. Though I'm not really quite sure what they were celebrating, because as we've previously discussed, everyone in Middle-earth was pagan. Check out our video here for more on that. Perhaps was it the second coming of Elisar? What was the Hobbits' endgame in all this? Why would they betray their closest ally, the source of all their exotic goods and advanced technology, which was the source of their power? Independence. Like the United States and England, the Shire was just waiting for their opportunity to throw off the colonial, paternalistic yoke of oppression from their allegedly benevolent benefactor, to return to their previous longtime ally in the Kingdom of Arnor, or, as we know them today, Gondor. After 65 years as a trading partner with the White Wizard of Isengard, the Hobbits clearly realized that they were being shortchanged by Saruman. What had started as a mutually beneficial economic arrangement had deteriorated into exploitation and isolation at the hand of the White Hand. They were being held back from becoming a central actor on the world stage of geopolitics. Rohan and Gondor had been on the decline for decades. There hadn't been a legitimate leader in the world of men for over 1,000 years. They were in need of a figurehead. Due to the rampant heightism of the time period, they knew they needed someone they could puppet from afar. Conferring with one of their other longtime benefactors, Gandalf the Grey, aka Mithrandir, aka Gandalf the White, aka Stormcrow, original alias Olorin of the Timeless Halls. Now, I've never been to the Timeless Halls, but that's too many names for an honorable person, in my humble opinion. The supposed Gandalf sourced a candidate of suitable political heritage and height. Next, they installed their puppet king, who immediately commanded the entire realm to bow to the hobbits, clearly signaling to all their newfound dominance over Middle-earth. Next, they returned to the Shire to perform the most important task of all, convincing Middle-earth of their innocence. So what do you think? Did the hobbits really assassinate all their political enemies, topple 2 regimes, and install a puppet king in a month? Well, let me ask you this. Where did you first learn about the hobbits and all of their allegedly heroic deeds? Was it in a book? Written by one J.R.R. Tolkien? But who is J.R.R. Tolkien? No one important at all. Just a mere translator, an intermediary between us and the truth. No, friends. This book was written by the very hobbits whose righteous cause this book allegedly proclaims. Is The Lord of the Rings the greatest piece of propaganda ever written? Remember that Lake Town was a dry run for the small, lean, surgical strike the hobbits would use later. It was also when the hobbits came into possession of the so-called One Ring, the most advanced weaponry ever developed in Middle-earth. And what did Bilbo do after returning home, pockets bursting with the weregild for his crimes? Write a book. A book obfuscating the involvement of the hobbits, demeaning himself as a witless tag-along of this troop of bearded foreigners off to reclaim their homeland, barely mentioning that this was all originating from and organized within Hobbiton itself by none other than the longtime Hobbiton political theorist and consultant, Gandalf the Grey. In a strikingly similar story, Bilbo's text describes a righteous crusade by foreigners to retake their occupied homeland and install the proper, shorter king, assassinating an occupier who had sat on said land for a generation without protestation from the local populace, and led to a thriving aquatic community, which would be destroyed when this hobbit and his strike team entered the region. So, what did the hobbits get out of it? The answer? Nukes. A small weapon capable of securing them power over the entire continent. Something that Mr. Baggins conveniently leaves out of his book, describing it as a mere trifle of a magical ring that renders the wearer invisible to sonar. But fortunately, not to Nazgar. Then as soon as the candidate to be their puppet king was secured and groomed by Mr. the Grey, Bilbo's next work would be the translation of Elvish texts that all shockingly outlined how this scrappy ranger from the north, in fact, not only had royal heritage dating back to the First Age, a conveniently unverifiable claim, but also the clearest claim to the throne of the most powerful kingdom of man. A kingdom which sat in literal geographic opposition to the Hobbit's primary target, Mordor. The crux of the claim completely nested on a single ring. Not even a magical one, just a really cool ring. I mean, look at it. No corroborating evidence, just the translation by Mr. Bilbo Baggins himself, whose cousin-nephew would install this very same king, Aragorn, the tall man whose finger bore that very royal ring, described in Bilbo's propaganda. How convenient. The Baggins cousins built a false royal legacy through literature alone. So after installing their false puppet king, Elisar they now called him, an elvish name used to invoke the now deposed powers of the past, the 4 Hobbit assassin terrorists and their manservant returned to the Shire to once again set the propaganda machine in motion. And what do Hobbits do best? Assassinate political figures, obviously. But after that, smoke pipeweed. But after that, write. The Lord of the Rings, they called it. An epic by their standards, cataloging the heroic deeds of their fellowship strike team and the righteous mission to destroy the evil Mordor alliance and its traitorous lieutenant Saruman of Isengard. How easily they twisted their terrorist attacks and political maneuverings into happenstance, inventing Ents, something we all know can't and do not exist, to cover up dam bombings, and further cementing the political claims of Aragorn Elisar, adding fantastical claims of elven heritage, magical long life, superhuman strength, and a super hot princess wife. The most cunning of all, they invented the perfect hero, Samwise the Gamgee. There are many who debate, did Samwise even exist? Could such a ray of positivity, endurance, and hope truly walk among us? No. This was their Uber Hobbit, a lower-class, hard-working soul with a heart of gold that was not ambitious, intelligent, nor aggressive. Exactly what they wanted the world to think they were. Remember, Frodo was the wealthiest Hobbit in the Shire. Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took were both moneyed members of the landed gentry. In what world would they be carousing with a lower-class hedge trimmer? They wouldn't. Samwise never existed. The real 4th member of the Frodo Four was none other than one Fredegar Fatty Bolger, who the text conveniently has disappear in Book 1, Chapter 11, and suspiciously resurfaces in Book 6, Chapter 9, when he is found in an alleged prison, having conveniently missed all the war crimes. It is further well known that hobbits have never practiced corporal punishment, and in fact just withhold beer as a form of remediation, which most hobbits describe as a fate worse than death. And by the way, if you want to know what beer they were withholding, most likely in their not prisons, check out our video up here for what they were drinking. Most damning of all, in all subsequent audiovisual adaptations, Fatty Bolger is completely omitted. It's as if they're trying to make all trace of him disappear from history, when in fact, Fatty Bolger may have been the architect of the entire operation, in concert with Gandalf the Grey and the deep pockets and inkwells of the Baggins cousins. Do you think it's a coincidence that King Elisar immediately put a ban on other folks from stepping foot into the Shire? That was the endgame all along. They had finally completed building their impenetrable shield of political power, economic dominance, and idyllic green hills. Then they also included a whole chapter on the history of pipeweed in the Shire for some reason. They really love their pipeweed. So what do you think? Did the hobbits pull off the perfect coup, or did they slip up in the final execution? Because, you might be asking yourself, what about the scourging of the Shire? You remember when Saruman returned to the Shire with a band of man-orcs and enslaved the local population? Or, I don't know, maybe that's just a story you read in a book once. Maybe actually a certain white wizard and former ally of the hobbits, not knowing that the instruments of his destruction were not in fact 40-foot-tall tree men, but 4-foot-tall dam-busting terrorists, sought the last bastion of security he had left, the Shire.
Maybe the hobbits, realizing that Saruman was too dangerous to be left alive, given his knowledge of their secret trade alliance and the danger that knowledge posed to their new world order, decided that they had only one course of action: write a new story. They couldn't take him out directly. Remember, their arms were way too short. So instead, they offered an exchange. They would give him freedom and protection in exchange for further technological insights. This led to an industrial revolution in the Shire and a rapid expansion of factory infrastructure. This supposed slavery, as it says in the text, was in fact more akin to wage slavery, as capitalist fervor gripped the Shire and the hobbits finally shed their cloak of pastoral innocence and embraced their technological supremacy. With the smokescreen of "Saruman corrupted us," the hobbits rewrote this period of their history, casting themselves as the victims in this rapid expansion. Then, as they always do, the hobbits hired someone with longer arms to do some stabbing. And Saruman, the last remaining witness to the true story of the hobbits' rise, was dead. Or he turned into a cloud or something. We're pretty sure that means dead though. He's a Maya. So what do you think? Was the scourging of the Shire a terrible example of war leaving no innocent untouched? Or was it an inside job from a savvy, conniving, murderous, short cabal of cloistered, industrial, technologically advanced, pipe-smoking, beer-drinking, hairy-footed hobbits? Well, my friend, if you're asking those kinds of questions like we are, you might just be a little lost in the speculation zone. Oh shit, it's actually this way. Hi, thank you all so much for watching. We've been trying some new stuff with our content, so if you dug this, let us know in the comments below so we can keep doing it. If you hated it, please also let us know in the comments as well so we can fight you. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Please just like and subscribe. Check out our other more straightforward content where we break down the beers, wines, and ales of Middle-earth. We just released a super long form of what they're drinking in the Shire. We got content on Mordor and Gondor as well. And we're about to go into some other fandoms too. Sneak peek, or it's already going on, depending on when this is released. We might have some Starfleet Somm stuff happening, so check that out. Thanks again so much for watching. Keep on drinking your nerddom.